Brandon Camp, VP of Delivery at Health Data Movers. We are a healthcare IT services firm that provides solutions to our healthcare partners through our 4 service lines: data management, integration, project management, and clinical and business applications. Here with me today, I have Mehul Malhotra, our Senior Director of Delivery over our data management integration service lines. Mehul, tell us a bit about what you do at HDM.
Thanks, Brandon. I work really closely with our health system partners on their EMR data migration and integration projects.
Health Data Movers does a lot of data migration projects, right? I believe that's probably bulk of the work you do.
Yeah, for sure.
So what we're hearing out there is a lot of healthcare organizations are struggling with it, and primarily because of issues with timeline constraints, trying to have that align with their EMR Epic implementation. There's problems around data quality, as well as building confidence in clinicians, right, to use that EMR, which typically result in problem stabilizing and frustration and go live. Is that true?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And that's why we developed what we call DataBridges. It's our delivery framework to bring structure to that whole process, right? So timelines are often constrained. Confidence in the end product is limited.
Health Data Movers has DataBridges as a delivery framework to bring structure to data migration projects. What often happens when there's no structure in place?
Yeah, and you nailed a couple of them. So typically the phases or the parts of the project where we see the most issues without any structure is in their scope definition phase. So defining what is going to be converted, how far back you're going to go, where you're going to get it from, and how you're going to do it, right? So that's a big one. And then the validation process. So either not validating enough data, not doing it to the right level that it needs to be done. So by the time you go live, you don't have enough time to actually resolve any of the issues that you would surface, and that leads to overall clinical unhappiness.
How does this delivery framework address all those issues and concerns?
We divide up our framework into 4 phases. So
Right.
we have define, prove, execute, and stabilize. And through those, we bring all of the structure that's needed in order to deliver on the project accurately.
Let's dig into those phases. So the first one you said is define. Tell us more about define.
In define, that's where we are getting access to the source system. We're setting up that groundwork, the governance to be able to deliver on the rest of the project. Identifying scope, what data you want to convert, how you want to do it. Are you going to electronically convert some of the data? Is it going to be the clear distinction between electronic conversion, abstraction, and archival. So we established that, starting to identify those validation resources, who's going to do that validation. And yeah, it's basically just like laying the groundwork for the rest of the project.
Who's typically part of data governance?
Yeah, so it's multiple layers of the organization. So identifying the right stakeholders,
Right.
Depending on the size of the organization, it could be a lot of people or at least a few key people who define that or make the decisions. And so it's like identifying who are the right stakeholders to be able to nail down what the scope is from a regulatory perspective, compliance perspective, clinical perspective, obviously. So those are the folks who are involved.
Abstraction and archive. Do they typically make the decision what to archive and what to abstract in this define phase?
Yeah, we start having those conversations then. We definitely recommend thinking about your archival strategy and your abstraction strategy as early as possible. Abstraction is something that happens a lot closer to go live, and we do offer those services. Archival is a project in and of itself. It can extend a little bit beyond your actual end user go live.
Right.
But yeah, we work with a couple of archival partners who have products in that space, and we work really closely with them to deliver on the overall migration strategy.
I'm assuming in this define phase, you want to have all your ducks in a row because you want to be aligned with the archival implementation plan, as well as what's going to be abstracted and get that in the timeline, but also, probably most importantly, aligning with the EMR implementation timeline. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. If they're doing a rollout, if they're migrating from one EMR to another, we work really closely through that timeline to make sure that all of the build phases, like all of the discrete data mapping that needs to be done, our project is aligned through with those dates, so that we minimize any sort of disruption or duplication of tasks.
What do you need before we move from this define phase to the prove phase?
Yeah, so definitely system access,
right.
which we already typically have at that point, or we've working through any last kinks with that. We expect sign off on what is the scope, agreement on what that scope is, and some level of build within the system so that we can move on to the next phase where we actually start testing.
Well, let's talk about the prove phase then.
Yeah. In Prove, that's where we go through our validation rounds. We go through iterative testing. Each phase builds upon the last one, increasing in size and scale and complexity. And we use leverage confidence gates to ensure that before we go from one phase of testing to the next.
What's the names of these different testing cycles?
We typically do a small scale round initially where it's just a handful of records, making sure that the data is moved over correctly, and then followed by one or more large scale rounds where it's a lot more data than what was in small scale. And then we typically do a couple of rounds of full scale, which is the equivalent of what will actually go into production, just going into a non-production environment for testing and validation purposes. Make sure that, again, it's all about that. You want to know what you're going to have in terms of issues as early as possible so that you can prep, plan, and resolve those rather than reacting at go live.
So earlier you mentioned confidence gates. I've been a part of many Epic implementations in the past where data migration was involved, and I've never heard that before. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so confidence gates is our term that we use for the moving from one phase of the testing to the next. So before we move from, let's say, small scale to large scale and then on to full scale, we want to have sign off from all of the stakeholders who are involved, ensuring that they have that trust in the process that we've already gone through to make sure that it's good enough to move on to the next. So as an example, generally when we do the initial round of testing, we just involve the IT stakeholders to do that validation. So then they sign off on the fact that the validation was successful, the content was good, the migrated data was accurate. And then when we go into large scale, that's when we want to involve our clinicians, operational staff, for them to actually look, does the data make sense? Is it in the right spots where they would expect it to see? From a clinician perspective, is it clinically accurate? Has it moved over correctly? And again, a confidence gate of having them sign off, make sure that they trust the data before we go on to any of the next rounds.
All right, so that last testing cycle, which I heard is full scale.
Yeah.
Right? So say you've completed that last full scale, now you're ready for the next phase, which is execute. What happens in the execute phase?
Yeah, so execute is now where we are much closer to actually go live. So this is our production cutover phase. So we have define a cutover plan, a proper sequence of events, the order in which we have to load the data, the amount of time that it takes to load this data is accounted for, and then most importantly, producing that sort of auditable process or reports to show that the data that was extracted was transformed accurately, was loaded. How many errors do we have? What needs to be resolved from? You're going to have some errors or the other, but having that full audit trail of how the data flowed from the source to the destination.
So that's considered the production load or production cutover of data.
Yep.
And that happens before the end user go live. How much before?
Yeah, that's right. So typically it happens around a month before. It varies depending on how much data needs to be migrated over, the size and complexity of that particular project. But yeah, it's typically done a month before. That way it gives us enough time to work through any sort of issues that we have before users actually hit the system.
End user go live comes. Now what phase are you in?
Yeah, so then we hit our final phase, which is called stabilize. So at this point, we have the data in production. We've done a catch up or a delta load between when we loaded the data a month prior to go live and as close to go live as possible. All those pieces are done, users are on the system, and they're going to find some issues with the data that's been converted, things that weren't caught during validation, but they're typically a lot smaller and fewer in volume. And the stabilize phase is where we're making sure that we follow through on triaging those issues, resolving them, putting the plans in place to mitigate those. We also execute on our post-production loads, right? So they're still working out of their old system. Let's just say some old lab results are coming through. Notes need to be signed off. So there's still some data that changes in the source, and that's what we are extracting and loading into the destination when we're in the stabilization phase.
What is the average error rate when using the DataBridges delivery framework?
Yeah, so we're really proud of error rates. By the time we go live, we're usually at like under a 1% error rate
Great.
for the data that's been transformed and loaded into the destination. And yeah, we do come across some post-live issues, but they're minimal.
Thank you, Mehul, for being here today and talking to us about DataBridges.
Thanks for having me.
If any of you are working on a new EMR implementation, data migration, a consolidation, we love to help you out. We can be contacted at solutions@healthdatamovers.com.